This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen starts today's show by continuing to recap the top developments in 2023 for agricultural law and taxation. Keeping the show going is A.J. Tarpoff, K-State Extension beef veterinarian, as he discusses what producers need to investigate before deciding to haul livestock. He says what extra preparation probably needs to take place. A segment of Ask the Experts from the Beef Cattle Institute completes today's show. K-State's Brad White, Brian Lubbers, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster talk about different times that calves may have extra management needs. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show continuing to discuss top developments in agricultural law and taxation in 2023. And in to talk about them, we're joined by K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Roger, we've now entered into your top 10 developments, and today looking at number 10, 9, and 8. And so kicking off with the 10th development, entire commercial wind development ordered removed. And what is that?
Well, this was a big case near the end of 2023, Shelby, where a federal court in Oklahoma ordered the removal of an entire wind energy development, a wind farm, so to speak, 150 megawatt development, and then set a trial for damages. And now this whole problem has been ongoing since 2011. It's the longest running legal battle concerning wind energy in the U.S. And back in 2017, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit, of which Oklahoma is a part, said that the wind energy company's construction and development constituted mining, and therefore they needed to get a mining lease from a tribal mineral council because this was on tribal land in Oklahoma, and they failed to do so. And then it finally gets, 6 years later into another court to enforce that, and the development company the energy company still hadn't gotten that mining lease yet. And so the court entered permanent injunctive relief for the tribe and ordered ejectment of the wind turbine farm for a continuing trespass.
What does that mean for that company?
Well, they're going to have to tear down 84 towers spread across 8,400 acres of the tallgrass prairie in Oklahoma. And that included leased surface rights and underground lines and overhead transmission lines and all their meteorological towers and access roads. And it's probably going to cost them at or over $300 million to do this. And again, the basis for this was when the 10th Circuit back in 2017 said that their development and excavation work constituted mineral development, and that has to have a federally approved lease when you're developing minerals on tribal land, and they never got one. It's the Osage Nation there that owns the rights to the subsurface minerals that it bought from the Cherokee Nation back in the late 1800s under an act, the Osage Allotment Act. And those mineral rights include the oil, the natural gas, and the rocks that were mined and crushed when this energy company was developing the project. And so it's a really big deal. You can't just ignore these court orders, which the energy company did to their detriment.
And what does this mean for agriculture?
Well, I think it's broader. Yes, this is on agricultural land, and of course, these big wind energy projects do have a very broad footprint on agricultural land, but it's broader than that. I think the broad point here is that energy companies have to pay attention to the law. They have to pay attention to what the courts say. They have to pay attention to property law under state as well as federal law, and you can't just ignore that. And in fact, the court, in its order in the 23 case, said that the public interest in private entities abiding by the law and respecting government sovereignty in the decisions of the courts was paramount, and that their refusal to get a lease constituted interference with the sovereignty of the Osage Nation, and that was sufficient to constitute what the court said was irreparable or irreparable injury.
And Roger, moving on to number 9 of the top 10 now, and this one involving reporting foreign income and a case that goes along with it for a person who had dual citizenship.
Yeah, it deals with reporting foreign bank accounts that exceed a certain threshold level. We can have income from foreign sources. And, of course, we have to report that in the United States. But there's also another requirement out there that says that if I have a bank account outside the United States that at any point during the year has a balance exceeding $10,000 in a single business day, then because of the terrorist attack over 20 years ago, there's a new law that was put in place, and it dovetails into the Bank Secrecy Act, which actually goes back to 1970, which has other obligations that are imposed on financial institutions in the United States. But what this says is if I have a foreign bank account that has a balance at any point in time over $10,000, I have to report that to the IRS by filing a form with the Financial Crimes Network. It's known as FinCEN Form 114 or an FBAR form. And if I don't do that, I can be penalized rather substantially.
Part of that penalization for this case kind of dealt with whether it should be on a per form or per account basis.
Yeah, that's right. In 2023, we had a case that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it involved a dual citizen of Romania and the United States who immigrated to the U.S. in 1982, became a U.S. citizen, lived here until 1990, and then went back to Romania. Well, he's got various Romania investments that amount to over $70 million, and actually he had 272 foreign bank accounts that tripped the $10,000 level. And so since he's a dual citizen in the U.S., he's got to file an FBAR for those. And he didn't know about the requirement for the non-U.S. accounts until 2012, and he should have filed for 5 years, and he didn't do that. And when he did initially file the FBARs, he didn't accurately report all of his accounts. So IRS swoops in and said, well, the penalty for you is $2,720,000. We'll buy the fact that you claim that it was a non-willful violation, so we're not going to throw in the criminal penalties and you go to prison. But we're going to fine you $2.72 million. So what they did to come up with that fine was multiply the fine by the number of bank accounts that he had. Well, he argued that, no, the fine should be on a per-form basis. I have to file one form per year to report all of my accounts, and I failed to do so for 5 years, and that's a $10,000 penalty per form times 5, so $50,000 should be my penalty, not $2.72 million. Goes all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and in a very slim majority decision, he wins 5-4, and the penalty is computed on the FBAR filing, not on the account basis. It's on a form basis. So he wins. He still has to pay a fine, but it was only a $50,000 fine instead of $2.72 million.
Roger, what does this mean for agriculture and taxpayers?
Well, in recent decades, we've had more and more farming operations, particularly larger operations, operate in countries in South America, such as Brazil or in Mexico or even in Canada. And if you establish a bank account in those areas and the balance exceeds $10,000 at any point in time, you have this requirement. You must file an FBAR. So if you're not aware of this, you need to talk to your tax professional about this. You don't want to get into the penalties under this.
And our number 8 thing for us to talk about for the 2023 involving corporate reporting requirements and something that was enacted in 2021 but has just come into effect at the beginning of this year.
That's right. The Corporate Transparency Act was enacted on January 1, 2021, and it has a requirement that starts this year, January 1, 2024. I put this in as a 2023 development because if we wait until to be talking about this next year, then it's too late because the reporting requirements are going to occur in 2024. So what is this? This is, again, a requirement that ties into what the government thinks is being able to track individuals that own businesses. It's an anti-money laundering initiative, trying to catch people that are creating shell corporations to avoid tax. And so basically what it is saying is that if you are a business, even though there are a bunch of exemptions, but a lot of those won't apply for our farm and ranch operations. If you have one of the exemptions that might is if you have 20 or more full-time U.S. employees and you report at least $5 million on your latest filed tax return and you have a physical presence in the U.S., then you're exempt. Now, that'll catch some of the bigger farming operations. But if you don't meet those criteria, then you've got to file this beneficial ownership information with the government. And you can fall into one of two categories as an individual who either directly or indirectly exercises substantial control over your business or owns or controls at least 25% of the ownership of the interests of a reporting company. So if you're basically anything other than a sole proprietorship and didn't generate more than $5 million worth of income on your last tax return, you have to report. You have to file one of these forms. And again, this has to be filed with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is a bureau of the Treasury Department.
And if people do have an entity that does mean an exemption, does that mean all of their entities are exempt?
No, and that's a great question because, let's see, for example, let's say I do have a large farming operation. I'm over the $5 million threshold. Say I have a general partnership. But I've got other businesses such as an equipment or a land LLC or some other related entity. Those related entities are going to have to file a report detailing the required beneficial ownership information. Just simply having one large entity is not enough to exempt the other entities.
And for people who are needing to make this filing, what are some of those deadlines?
Well, if you were in existence before 2024 started, then you have to file this information with FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, by the end of 24. If you are a new business that starts up in 2024, then you have 90 days to report. And then after 2024, you have 30 days.
Roger, if people would like to keep up to date with your top 10 developments in ag law and taxation, how can they do that?
Well, there are a couple of ways. You can go to my website, which is Washburnlaw.edu/WALTR, or you can go to the AgManager website through the Department of Ag Econ at K-State.
Roger, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about some top developments in ag law and tax.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. If you'd like to read the article that talks about 3 of his top 10 developments in agricultural law and taxation in 2023, you can do so by going to AgManager.info, or you can also find it on his website at Washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. I will link both of those in today's show notes on agtoday.net, as well as the article if you'd like to go read about these topics. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be joined by K-State Extension beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Wednesday show discussing transporting livestock. And then to talk about it, we're joined by K-State Extension beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff. A.J., thanks for joining us today.
Always a pleasure to be on.
A.J., as we're talking about transporting livestock, really thinking about it in these really cool conditions. And first, a really simple question to ask for producers before they even think about loading their trailer.
Yeah, the easiest question is, do they have to get on the trailer and go somewhere today? And because cold stress is the major issue, especially with the wind chills that we have, the cold weather that we've been dealing with, the inconsistent roadway, circumstances where we may get stuck. The first and foremost question is, do we have to transport? And understand at the speed of commerce, animals are moving everywhere, every day. But, back to the basics, do they have to ship today, or can we wait until after this cold spell?
And for people who do have to ship those animals, what are a few things for them to consider?
Yeah, pre-shipping preparations are everything. And I think it always starts with, whether you're working with a commercial trucking operation, really asking the questions with dispatch on, when they need to be loaded. Can we load during the heat, quote unquote, heat of the day? It's kind of hard to talk about the heat of the day when it doesn't get, above zero. But again, transporting during the warm daylight hours, if you can, making sure that the route that is chosen has free, clear roadways, that we're not going to run into, any delays. Safety checks, on trucks and trailers. This is paramount, especially during cold stress, because we never want to have that truck, down or minimize stops. We want to get those animals on the road, get them to their destination as quickly as possible.
And so mentioning not taking stops, loading, hopping on the road and getting there?
Yep, pre-filling with fuel, pre-grabbing coffee, get all that taken care of first, then load the truck and get them to the destination ASAP.
And as we've thought about getting our truck prepped, it's also important to make sure the animals are good to go as well.
I agree. And I think that the pre-animal care is just as important as the animal care during transport. So really, we want to try to maximize comfort. And in order to do that, those animals need to be prepared to get onto that truck. Choosing the right animals. If we're hauling finished cattle, that's not a concern. But if you do have cull cows or anything like that, that may be a concern. So we need to load the correct animals that are fit for transport. Number 2 is feed in bed, right? We need to feed these animals. The rumen is going to keep them warm during transport, regardless of that wind chill factor that they may may incur. So we want to have them fed. We also want to keep them well bedded prior to transport. And that'll do a couple of different things. One, it'll keep them warm and keep them comfortable. But more importantly, what it does with the cattle hides. We reduce tag. We can make sure that they have a nice dry hair coat prior to loading. Because the worst thing we can have is have an animal with heavy tag or wet hide get on the truck for transport during this type of cold conditions. So that pre-care, feed, bedding, good hide coat, making sure it's not covered in mud or wet, that care can go a long way for the animal comfort during transport.
And getting those cattle onto the trailer is also something to think about.
Oh, the conditions, footing conditions have absolutely changed in loadout areas or wherever, whether it's a farmer rancher loading out of some corrals, or if it's a commercial feedlot, there's probably some icy areas regardless of the operation. So have a good real assessment to make sure that we have good functional footing during the loadout, during any handling areas where those animals are going to be turning. We do have icy. If we have, very rough frozen mud areas, making sure we can get those tops kind of knocked off with a skid steer. If there are ice, it's almost impossible to melt ice at this time. So sand goes a long way, sand or even bedding that we can utilize in some of those high traffic areas to make sure that we don't have slipping, we don't have sliding. We're going to minimize any potential injury by doing that pre-check, doing that kind of facility check before we start moving animals around.
And on the topic of bedding, something maybe to think about for the trailer.
It might be. So in some circumstances, we can get some slick conditions on the inside of trailers. And obviously our steel or aluminum trailers, they're designed to have good footing. However, when things freeze, it kind of takes away a whole different monster when it comes to slipping and sliding. So don't be afraid of utilizing some either wood chip bedding or some type of bedding on the inside of trailers to ensure not for the animals to lay down, but to ensure those animals have a good solid footing where they're not going to slip and slide during transport due to the frozen conditions around them. Because it doesn't, obviously, an animal, if it defecates or urinates, that freezes rather quickly on that trailer, and we don't want that to interfere with that animal's ability to stay standing and stay comfortable.
And on trailers, usually there's quite a few different vents, and is that something that producers should think about?
It might be. So a lot of the newer age, trailers have a lot of excess ventilation, and that's good for animal welfare to ensure that we have, plenty of, keep them nice and cool during the summer months. However, during the winter, we do have some options where we might be able to close some of those airway vents, not to reduce ventilation to where we can increase humidity or anything like that in the trailer, but maybe the nose vent, reduce the amount of direct airflow flowing in from the air from the roadways, so we can reduce kind of that circulating really cold, nasty air. So we can close some of those vents, or if there is a lot of salt that's been out on the road and we start to have some melting, consider closing some of the airways, the lower slats on if it's a pot liner, closing some of those lower ones where we might get road splash. On the inside of the animals. Again, we want to keep them dry. We want to keep them comfortable. So any over ventilation or, protecting them from any roadway splash can go a long way for their comfort from point A to point B.
And when it does come to loading, are there things that maybe is a misconception when how tight producers should pack their animals in?
Right. So it's cold, and they like to bunch up, right? So we just, if we put more animals within a compartment, they ought to stay warm. That's kind of a misconception. So we don't want to overstock, especially at any time, but especially during the cold weather periods of time, because if the animals can't move from an uncomfortable location, it increases the likelihood of a frostbite scenario. So if they're very cold, or if they're on the, on the outside, outside animals next to the trailer walls, and they're getting direct breeze from some of the vents, and if they get uncomfortable, they need to be able to move. So don't overload the trailers, in individual compartments, to allow the animals to find the most comfortable area within that trailer compartment so they don't run into those issues.
And overall, as we wrap up our conversation about hopefully people safely transporting livestock if they have to, what is a key fact that you just want to remind them of?
I think the key fact right now is monitor road conditions, monitor weather conditions. Roadways can change in an instant if the wind picks up with all the fresh snow that we have throughout the state. Be prepared. Obviously have, emergency, numbers to be able to call, pre-check a lot of the roadway and weather conditions where you're going. And ultimately, can the location you're taking them to, whether you're hauling calves to a feedlot, you're taking animals to a slaughter facility, are they open? Can they actually take your animals, or are they snowed in too? So all that pre-check goes a long way, but monitor conditions, road, weather, everything involved, along your trip.
AJ, as we're talking about caring for the animals and hopefully giving them best conditions possible, beef quality assurance is something important to think about.
It absolutely is. And there is a beef quality assurance transportation module that is available for all livestock transporters. While we don't have some of those upcoming meetings for the transportation side, we do have a statewide series of regular beef quality assurance for all cattle producers within the state. We have numerous meetings lined up over the next month or two that we will be conducting in cooperation with the Kansas Beef Council. I'll be out traveling around the state to be able to do this certification and training. And this is a nationally organized, state-implemented certification program where producers come, they keep up to date. This is the continuing education for the beef cattle producer. And their certification's good for 3 years. And this is kind of going above and beyond and really showing our consumer that we want to do the right things. We're staying up on it, and we're doing the best of everything that we can do to care for our animals. That's where this training comes into play. It's review for a lot of people, but it's really providing some of those updated best management practices to keep our producers at the forefront of change within our industry. So I will point out that those meetings scattered throughout the state, you can find more information both on the Kansas Livestock Association website, as well as I will have those available up on our ksubeef.org website as well. So those two locations, if you're curious, please come, get a nice beef meal and some good discussion and some good education coming up here in the next couple months.
Is there a registration that goes along with them?
Most of them do not have a specific registration, but it is welcome to be able to call. And each one of those locations will have a contact where you can provide some of that RSVP information. Again, we love if you can come. We prefer an RSVP, but we're never going to turn somebody away.
AJ, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about transporting livestock, but then also the upcoming BQA meetings.
Thank you.
That was K-State Extension beef veterinarian AJ Tarpoff. You can find more information about these upcoming beef quality assurance trainings by going to KLA.org, or they'll also soon be posted on KSUbeef.org. I will link both of those in today's show notes, which as always you can find on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be joined by the Beef Cattle Institute for another segment of Ask the Experts. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show with the Beef Cattle Institute's Ask the Experts.
Hi, welcome to Beef Cattle Institute's Ask the Experts, where our experts will answer your questions. I'm Brad White. Happy to have you with us today. And I'm joined by three experts today, Dr. Phillip Lancaster.
Hello, guys.
Dr. Bob Larson.
Good morning.
And Dr. Brian Lubbers.
Hello.
Today's question comes to us, and it's about managing those new young calves. We talked a little bit about this in our last week's Ask the Experts question. But, Brian, I wanted to ask you, how do I decide when I need to supplement a calf with colostrum, or should I let him nurse from his mother?
Yeah, so if he isn't up and suckling, so we mentioned last week, strong suckling reflex is important for a calf. So if he doesn't have the strong suckling reflex, now is the time. But if he isn't up and standing, within about 12 hours probably would be a good general rule of thumb, because we want to make sure we get that colostrum in him well before 24, and the earlier the better.
Okay, Bob, I'm going to go to you and say colostrum milked from the cow, or can I use some commercially pre-prepared colostrum?
Well, my preference is still milk from the cow, but that involves problems because it's a beef cow and she may not like to be milked and she may not really be able to let down and get that. So if I can get her in and get colostrum from the cow, that's my preference. But I think the kind of colostrum replacements, they're pretty expensive, but they're pretty good, and they're kind of my second choice, and they work pretty well.
And that colostrum is that first milk from the cow that has the antibodies, which will help give that calf his immunity for the first 4 to 7 months of his life. And he needs to ingest that, as you guys said, ideally within the first 12 hours, but up to that first 24 hours of life. So as we're watching those calves closely, we want to get that into them as soon as possible. Now, Philip, I'm going to move on from colostrum and talk a little bit about lactation. When we think about lactation in beef cows, when would you expect her peak lactation to be? Because that's going to coincide with some of my nutritional requirements.
So it varies some, but usually somewhere between 6 and 9 weeks is going to be when her peak lactation occurs, after 6 to 9 weeks after calving.
Yep, and so then it's going to drop off after that. And when would you expect lactation to be at a point where the calf's probably not getting a lot of nutrition from his dam?
Probably when we get to about 4 months or so, 4 to 5 months. That's when the calf's forage intake is going to start to come up at about 2 months or so. He's going to start to eat a little bit before that, but he's really going to actually start to eat stuff daily, consistently at around 2 months, and that's going to start to climb. But then as milk is decreasing, that forage has got to make up the difference. And those, if you kind of draw those lines on a graph, they cross somewhere around 4 to 5 months.
And obviously some differences between breeds, but it's helpful to understand that lactation curve, and it matters when we calve, right? So if I'm calving in January versus if I'm calving in May, makes a big difference. So Brian and Bob, I'm going to move on to the calf health aspects, and I'm going to divide it into kind of the first 3 weeks of life. Brian, what are the first couple diseases you think of? And Bob, I'm going to ask you after the first 3 weeks of life.
Yeah, so the early things that we think about with early calf mortality will be injury, not in any particular order, though. So injury would be one. Scours is going to be the big one. And then early, like the first 24 hours, depending on where you're at, hyperthermia would be things. So things to kind of think about. But as far as infectious diseases go, it's gonna be scours. So E. coli, viral pathogens.
So scours that first 3 weeks of life, but also those calves that had any type of dystocia can be more susceptible to injury or hypothermia or any of those factors. Yeah. What about after they make it through that 3 week period, Bob?
After about 3 weeks, a couple of the diseases that we start to see are that summer pneumonia or calf pneumonia, which we'll see out there for 5 months of age. And the other thing are just some other things that can kind of get calves in that. So black leg and just some Clostridium perfringens, just some odd things. Usually not a lot of animals, just kind of here or there. But the summer pneumonia one or the suckling calf pneumonia is one where you can affect a number of calves.
Yeah, absolutely. And both those, as you guys mentioned, you can have scours and respiratory disease young, but mostly it's scours and then it transitions to be respiratory disease. But both of those we would want to watch for calves that are off by themselves, not staying with the group, lagging behind. A little bit different signs than we might see in older animals, but you got to have a chance to take a look at all those calves every day. So I appreciate you guys sharing with us on young calves and young calf management, and thanks for joining us.
That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.